Hello and welcome to today's Cambridge University Press ELT webinar, a panoramic view of our new teaching landscape presented by Ceri Jones. I'm Ian Cook and I'll be moderating today's session along with my colleague Hannah Tuck, who is monitoring your questions. During the webinar, you'll be able to hear our speaker and you will be able to see her slides, but you won't be able to see Ceri herself. You won't need a microphone. If you want to ask a question, please use the box on the right and we'll be sure to put your questions to Ceri at the end of the presentation during the scheduled question and answer session. The recording of today's webinar will be sent to you in an email along with your certificate of attendance. Please allow up to 2 weeks for this to arrive. We're also providing you with a downloadable ebook guide and an exclusive ebook tips resource, both written by Ceri, which we're giving away to webinar attendees today. The resources should appear near to your question box, ready for you to click on and download. If you have any technical difficulties throughout the broadcast, please pop these in the chat or questions box and we'll see if we can help. So, I'm very pleased to welcome Ceri Jones as today's presenter. Ceri is a freelance teacher, trainer and materials writer. She's one of the authors on our new English course, Evolve, and has been working in ELT since 1986 and in Spain since 1998. She's particularly interested in student-centered materials and activities. Ceri has extensive experience developing language courses for both secondary and adult learners, and has recently been working on the support for Evolve eBooks, which have just been published. This includes a guide to using the student ebook, which you can find on our web hub, cambridge.org/evolve. So, over to you, Ceri.
Thank you very much, Ian. Hello, everybody. It's wonderful to be speaking to you wherever you are from all over the world. I hope you're all well and ready to have a panoramic look at our new teaching landscape. Here is a very brief summary of our webinar for today. First of all, we're going to go on a brief journey in time through English language classrooms. Then we're going to take a slightly closer look at classrooms today in the digital age and at some of the tech tools that we're using now more and more in our classrooms. We're going to look specifically, in fact, at one tool, the ebook, and through that explore all of the new opportunities we have in our online classrooms. And in the end, we'll have questions. As Ian has said, there's a question box where you can write your questions to me, and we'll collect those and come back to them at the end of the webinar. So first of all, a brief journey in time. Okay, here's a classroom, a fairly typical classroom that has been around for some time. It doesn't mean that it isn't around anymore. I've taught in classrooms like this very, very recently with the blackboard and very little other technology in the classroom. Here's a slightly more up-to-date classroom, maybe. Maybe this is the kind of classroom that you teach in. This one has an interactive whiteboard. Maybe other similar classrooms will have a projector and a regular whiteboard, but where you can project digital materials onto your board. And we have one student who's there busily working on the whiteboard. We can see on the desk that there's also a tablet. So the students are accessing their materials on the whiteboard or on the tablet. But they're sitting in rows looking forward towards the board. So really not that different from the picture we saw before. Here maybe is the kind of classroom that might be considered a little bit, sorry, we'll just go back there, a little bit more up to date. We see the students working in groups. They have technology that they're using as a resource, and the teacher is walking around the classroom, going from group to group, helping the students access their materials and complete their group work around the classroom. So, of these three classrooms, which one is most familiar to you? Which one looks like the classroom that you're in every day? I'd like to point out one thing about all these classrooms, though, that although there are lots of differences, although there are lots of different tools, some things are exactly the same. In each classroom, we have a teacher, and in each classroom, we have students. And the relationship between the students and the teacher is central to the learning that's going on. So really, the teaching, the learning, that's the same, the whole learning experience. But it's the classrooms where we're learning that makes the difference. Okay, so I'm going to indulge myself for a moment and take you on a journey back in time through to my very first classroom. Do you recognize this piece of teaching equipment? Okay, when I went into my first classroom, this was one piece of equipment I had, which was the overhead projector. I wonder how many of you remember slides and acetates that we prepared to use on the overhead projector. I thought that this was an amazing piece of technology at the time. How about this piece of technology? I can remember in my very first classroom, I'm going to show my age now, back in the 1980s, and we had a computer, a BBC computer and a floppy disk, and we had games that we could play with the students in class. We'd roll the computer into the classroom on a trolley. We had one that we shared between all of the classrooms in school, and there was great excitement over the games that we could play on it. And the third one, I wonder if you can guess what the third piece of equipment from the 1980s was. That's right, a cassette recorder. And of course, we used it to play audio, but also to record the students. And I can remember spending long, long hours trying to write transcripts of what my students had recorded in the classroom, and how shy they all were to record themselves on this at the time cutting edge piece of technology. And now I think that is one of the things that has changed, is students are now so much more comfortable with the sound of their own voices in recordings, so much more comfortable with using any kind of computer technology on their phone, on their personal computers, on their tablets. So we have moved on from this first classroom, but I would say that the technology changes, but maybe a lot of the things that we do as teachers are the same. We just adapt to our new circumstances. So now let's take a closer look at classrooms today. This certainly wasn't a piece of technology that was around in my first classrooms, the tablet. But it's been around for quite a while now, I would say. Students have been bringing tablets into the classroom for maybe the last 10 years or more. This, of course, is another piece of wonderful technology that we can do so much with, the mobile phone and headphones. There is a big question over both the tablet and the mobile phone, of course, and that is the question of connectivity and whether or not we want students to be connecting to the internet in the classroom. And I think this depends very much on the context, on the type of classes we're teaching, if we're working with young learners or not, what the institution or even maybe the education authorities' attitude is to mobile phones. There are dangers, of course, of distractions, for example. There's so much going on that the students can get distracted with, or dangers also of cyberbullying. So sometimes we may want to use these devices, but without a connection to the internet, but they're still wonderfully resourceful devices that we can use in the classroom. And of course, the third new technology which has been coming into our classrooms and in fact transforming our classrooms is the virtual classroom. So here we have video conferencing and all of the opportunities and affordances that this can bring us and has brought us in the last 6 months. Those of us who haven't been able to be in the same room physically with our students, we have been able to reach them, to work together, thanks mainly to all of the different video conferencing platforms that we can use. So let's just flick back again to look at these 3 types of classroom. Now, all 3 classrooms do exist today. We do teach in these 3 classrooms. And the thing that they have in common, apart from the central relationship between the teacher and the students, is that we can take our mobile technologies into all 3 of these classrooms. So we don't have to be in a super modern classroom to be able to use the affordances of a digital device. We have these in our pockets in the form of a mobile phone, or in our bags in the form of a tablet or a portable laptop computer. So we can bring technology into any of these classrooms. Okay, let's go back to the tablet and let's take a closer look at what we can do with this device and other similar portable screens. And particularly, we're going to look at the use of eBooks. So have a look at this slide. This is exactly the same book, but one is a print version and one is the ebook version. Can you see which is which? I guess it's not difficult. The background kind of gives it away. I'm going to make it easier with the next slide. Okay, so now you can see which is which. But basically, an ebook and a print book is the same thing, it's just in a different format. They both have covers, they both have pages, we can flick through them page by page, we can jump around in them, as they have the same content. So a print book, okay, it's heavier, we have to carry it around in our bag. An ebook, we can access it anywhere we want, but basically the content is the same. Although I would argue that there are some added benefits to an ebook. Let's have a look at one page from the book. Okay, so this was a page taken more or less at random, and you can see here that this is the first section in a lesson. It's lesson 2 of unit 2, and we can see that the topic is food, and this is the vocabulary section. Look more closely at the first 2 exercises, and you'll see that these are listening exercises. They are, in fact, pronunciation exercises. So the students, they see the words, they hear the words, they can repeat the words. Now, if we were doing this with a print book, the teacher would be in control of the audio. But with an ebook, the audio is actually embedded in the book, and all the students need to do is click on the audio icon and they hear the recording. This has got a couple of great advantages. First of all, if the students are using their own headphones, as we saw earlier, they are hearing the quality of the audio to the best they can. There's no distortion because it's coming through the speakers of the classroom, no problems with acoustics, no problems with background noise. And when you're working with pronunciation, this is especially important. Secondly, the students are in charge. They can click again on the same icon and the recording stops. Click again, it starts again. They are in control of the pace there's one word in particular which is more difficult, they can listen to it again and again. So in groups, students could be working together, working on the pronunciation together, or they could be doing this at home. If you want to work in a flipped approach, where you're asking your students to study the language at home before they come to class to practice it, then ebooks are wonderful for this, because the audio is there to support the learning of the vocabulary, and the students can come to class ready with their questions, their doubts, and ready to practice. So that's one way that the ebook has added value, because the audio is embedded on the page. Okay, here are the audio activities. And here we are, a summary of the advantages. Okay, let's look at another feature on the same page. At the foot of the page, we see what is a simple reference to an exercise at the back of the book. Students click on this in their ebook, and immediately the practice opens up on the screen for them. Now, this is such a small thing, you'd say, okay, you just flick to the back of the book. But somehow having that there at the point of need, one click away, that you can just open it up on the screen exactly where and when you need it, is much more effective, much more impactful. And these exercises, which otherwise might actually go ignored, forgotten, unnoticed, they're there and can be accessed at a click of a button. Let's look at another detail from the ebook. Okay, have a look at these pictures. Well, it's obviously explaining a recipe, right? What food do you think it's showing? Just think about that for a second or two. Now, of course, also, the steps for the recipe are not in the correct order. I'm sure you noticed that. Look at the steps for the recipe. What do you think is the correct order? Okay, so I'll just repeat those questions. What is the food? And what is the order for the recipe? And now, rather than play the audio to you, which is what I would do as a teacher in class, I'm going to read the script. Listen. Is this the food you thought it was? Is this the right order for the pictures? Today, we're going to prepare kimchi, a spicy cabbage recipe from Korea. Even if you don't like cabbage, after you hear this recipe, you'll want to try it. Let's begin. First, chop a head of cabbage into small pieces. Cover it with salt and leave it in water. Let it stand for about 2 hours, then rinse the cabbage in cold water and drain it. Stir together with the garlic, ginger, and sugar. Add in shrimp paste and a chili powder called gochugaru. Then add in the spring onions and radish. Use your hands to mix it all together with the cabbage. Remember to wear gloves. Finally, put the kimchi into a jar and leave it to ferment. You'll have to wait about 5 days until the kimchi is ready to eat. When the flavor is just right, transfer it to the fridge. That stops the fermentation process. Kimchi will stay fresh in the fridge for up to 3 months. Your guests will be so impressed when they try it. You'll see. Okay, so that is a very simple listening comprehension task, which is in the book, whether it's a print book or the ebook. The teacher could choose to play the audio, so they're in control of the pace, or students could listen to the audio in groups. Did you get the answers? Did you understand what food it was and the steps? Let's have a look. Okay, so There is the task for the students, the task that you completed as you listened. Just think about this. Would you like to try to make this dish? Do you make this dish? I love kimchi, but I've never tried making it myself. So, in this case, this is how the ebook is helping us and supporting our students. So we can get the students in control of the listening, and working together they can decide on how much they need to listen, what parts they need to listen to again. Let's take a closer look at the audio script. Okay, so the audio script is on the page, and here it is. And one of the vocabulary sets that we're looking at in this lesson is verbs for cooking. You may be able to see there that some of the verbs are in bold. Well, we might want to extend that set, because in our reading text here, the listening text, there are other food verbs as well. Take a quick look. Can you see the other cooking verbs, food preparation verbs? Did you spot these? Okay, so here, this is another one of the things that we can do with our ebook. Of course, we can do this with a print book as well. We can ask the students to highlight all of the cooking verbs, all of the food preparation verbs on their print book. But we can also ask them to do this on their ebook. They simply have to hover on the word with their mouse, and the highlighting tool pops up for them, and they can highlight the words on the text on the screen. The advantage that an ebook has over a print book, of course, is that you can also delete the highlighting. So you make a mistake, you can just get rid of it. Of course, in a print book, once you've highlighted it, it's highlighted. So that's one thing, but also you may only want to highlight something temporarily. You may want to use the highlighting for a specific task, like this one, for example. Okay, so this is one thing we can do, and here we can ask the students to work with the meaning of the different verbs, maybe mime them, but I would like to take it a little bit further and ask them to notice something else about the language. Let's ask them to highlight another feature. Oh, sorry. First of all, we'll ask them to write a note on the page of their ebook. And this is another thing that we can do on a print book or on an ebook. We can make notes in the book. On the ebook, this means that a little notepad feature clicks up. You can type onto this and keep your notes. In this way, the students are creating a record of the key vocabulary that they can access from any page in the book. So they can go to their notes and bring up this list of verbs on any page of the book. Okay, so they can take notes and retrieve them later. We're going to come back to these notes again after the next step in the task. Now, I have asked the students to look at another feature of the language. We have the verbs. This time, the student had decided to highlight the verbs in purple. And I've asked the students to highlight something else in green. Can you see what the student has highlighted in green? I think this is an important extension because as a teacher here, I'm not only interested in the students understanding these verbs, I'm interested in them being able to use them, because the final task of the lesson is going to be to ask the students to explain a recipe of their own. And they may want to use some of these verbs. And in order to be able to use these verbs correctly, to be able to manipulate these verbs, they also need to know about the dependent prepositions. So this is what we have here. The students have gone through and highlighted any dependent prepositions. And then we go back to the note feature. Here we go. So this time the students go back to the same notes that they made before on the screen, and they add the prepositions. In this way, we're extending the notes, we're making them more useful, and the students will come back to these again when it comes to the final task. Okay, so here we have highlighting, making notes. These are things we do in a print book, but they don't necessarily stay. Sometimes we're not allowed to write in our print books. Sometimes we don't want to write in our print books. But if we're looking for the notes that we wrote on one particular page, we have to flick back to that page. Whereas with an ebook, we have a separate record of all our notes, and we can search it very quickly. I could search by using the keyword cooking, and these notes would pop up. So they're there whenever you need them, and very quickly, just at a click of a button. Okay, so as I was saying, the final task in this lesson is for the students to take the language that they've learned and to use it themselves to talk about a typical dish from their own culture. Here on the page, we see another feature of the course, which is another feature which gives us an added value in the ebook. Okay, so we have the video. You see here the real student video. In the print book, students can access this video on their mobile phones by using the QR code that you can see there in the image. And in the ebook, they simply press on that little play button. They press play and the video plays. They press pause and the video stops. And they can use the video as a model for their speaking. So it's there for them, just one click away. They're in charge. They are controlling the video. Okay. Let's have a look at another task, similar task, using the highlighting tool again. This is a task from another unit and another level. This is a lower level. So you can see that different language has been highlighted in different colors. I'm going to give you just a few seconds to look at those colors and try to work out the coding. And then I'll explain to you how this colourful coding came about in a lesson that I did with a group of students. So we'd been working with this text which explains how advertisers sell cards. To set up the idea of highlighting a particular vocabulary set or a particular language area, I use the yellow highlighting to highlight 3 key words in the opening paragraph, which are associated with advertising. Then I divided the class into groups, and each group had a different highlighting task that they had to do on their ebooks. So the green group were highlighting nouns connected to cars. The pink group were highlighting the adjectives that were being used to sell the cars. The blue group was highlighting the verbs that were being used to sell the cars. Okay. I think we have a couple of mistakes there. Clean and important should have been pink. Anyway, forgive me for that mistake. So each group went away and they highlighted the language focus that they were in charge of. They were the language detectives, highlighting this language throughout the text. And then they came back to the class and they presented what they had found out about their particular language area. I had my ebook projected on the main board, and we used the highlighting to highlight the different kinds of language that each group had been working on. And this was something that then we could all work on together. This is a task that we can do with any reading text. All reading texts will have semantic groups. All reading texts will have verbs, prepositions, nouns, or adjectives that we want to explore. But there may be that we just want to look at one particular aspect. For example, here, the use of the present continuous to describe what's happening in the scene. This is something which could be really useful for a grammar focus, for example. So you might ask all the class to highlight the same kind of language. I wouldn't do this with all reading texts, but every now and then I think it's quite interesting and useful to get the students to do the language work. And it's a great group task, which makes them concentrate a little bit more closely on the reading text and helps them to become language detectives when they are reading English outside the classroom context. Okay, so far we've been talking about using eBooks in the physical classroom, but of course we can use eBooks equally well in the digital classroom. So looking at taking our classes online, as a lot of us have had to do, eBooks can also help and support us in our online virtual classes. So first of all, and probably the most immediate for a lot of us over the last 6 months, would be the problem of access to books. I know that some school and university closures happened practically overnight. Students didn't have a chance to get all of their books home with them, so they were at home with no physical books. So an e-book was a wonderful way to be able to access the course book at home without needing to go and find the physical book. Audio and video links can be really problematic in a virtual classroom. Students have different levels of connectivity. Audio and video takes more data. They're more susceptible to lag. The quality of the audio sometimes is not the best when you're in an online classroom. So the fact that the students have immediate, easy access to the audio and the video texts in their books is fantastic, because the teacher can be sure that the students can hear the audio and the video clearly. And the same advantages that we've discussed in the physical classroom, of course, also exist in the digital classroom, of students being in charge of encouraging autonomy, of students deciding when they need to listen again, what they want to listen again to. On-screen annotations, again, this is something that is really useful, that can be shared. If you send students into a breakout room, for example, they can share their screen. One of the students can be annotating their ebook on the screen. The annotations can be shared. You can copy the annotations and send them to a classmate. You can actually send them through immediately from the ebook. So this is really useful as well when the students are working in groups. The ebooks support a flipped approach so well because the students are able to do the listening tasks alone, away from the classroom, and then the use of the virtual classroom time is for discussion, for doubts, questions, and putting the language into practice. As we said, for the physical classroom, also for the digital classroom, for the online virtual classroom, we are fostering autonomy. And when our students are not in the same room as us, it's even more important for us to be able to foster autonomy so that the students feel that they can take control, that they can do things without needing a teacher in the room with them. We're there virtually, but we're not there physically. And so anything that we can do to boost their independence and their feeling of autonomy is great. As I already mentioned with the on-screen annotations, screen sharing. So this is whatever device we're accessing the virtual classroom on, we can also access the ebook, which means that we can share pages from the ebook in the virtual classroom. This is fantastic for the teacher as well as for the students. Some teachers may be using a Presentation Plus type of technology with their books, which means they already are able to project and share their books. If not, an ebook is wonderful because you can share it on the screen. Everybody knows where we are. We're on the same page, as it were, and the students are following on their ebooks. Group work in breakout rooms. Often one of the problems is that the materials that we're sharing in the main classroom can't be transferred easily into the breakout room without the students needing to screenshot or copy or whatever. But if we're using the ebook, then the students have their ebooks in the breakout room. There's absolutely no problem whatsoever in accessing the materials. And this means that then when the students come back into the main rooms, they can use the work that they did together in their breakout rooms to teach the rest of the class in the plenary session. And this means that the main virtual classroom doesn't have to be so teacher-led, and there's more space for the students to take charge of the lesson. So this is why an ebook can be useful. And here is a summary of the how. So, first of all, students use their own devices to work on pronunciation activities. Like we saw at the beginning with the vocabulary for food, students can work on pronunciation on their own. They don't need the teacher. The students are using their own devices to listen to audio texts and to watch videos. So again, bypassing any kind of technical problems that sharing these kind of files can cause in a lesson. The students are highlighting the target language in their own ebooks on their own screens at the same time as they're following the class. Everything is in the same place and it makes it much more manageable. And we come to the last point, which was the notes. Students, just as they can on their ebooks in the physical classroom, in the digital classroom, the virtual classroom, they can make, expand, retrieve, reuse, and share their notes on their screens. Okay, so we have been on a brief journey, first of all, through time, but then from physical classrooms through into our virtual classrooms. And we've taken eBooks as an example of how we can help our students to become more autonomous, to become more independent, and how we can use eBooks to boost the efficiency of our teaching and our learning in the classroom. So now I'm more than happy to take questions. Okay, I see a question here from Rosemary, I believe. Just a second. Can you give an example of flipped learning, please? Yes, certainly, Rosemary. So the basic concept of flipped learning is that the students study input or a language area on their own outside the classroom before a lesson. And when they come to the lesson, the time in the lesson is used to practice, to clarify concepts, to answer questions, But above all, when we're talking about a language classroom, to put the language into practice, to activate the language. So a flipped approach might ask students to study a grammar point on their own at home. Maybe there's a video tutorial that they can watch, and then when they come into class, the teacher has set up various practice activities where the students get to use that grammar. It might be a vocabulary set, so the food set, for example. Rather than using time in the classroom to present that vocabulary, the students have studied the vocabulary beforehand, and so the teacher can just jump straight in with the practice, the activation. The students are taking part in communicative activities straight away. One of the challenges of a flipped approach is to motivate the students to do the studying before they come to class. Generally speaking, this happens gradually, and the students learn that it is really useful for them to have prepared when they see that they need that language in the activities, and they see that the students who have prepared are much more fluent, much more confident with the use of the language, and so generally speaking they come on board. I don't know if that answered your question, Rosemary. Erica is asking a question which I'm afraid I don't have any statistical information on, and the question is, are English schools in the United States and England using ebooks more? Do the students use only the ebooks, or do they need both, the ebook and the printed version? And what is its impact on the teenagers' education? So I'm afraid I have no statistical information to answer this question. However, I can answer the middle question, which was, do they need both? And the answer to that is no, they do not need both. One substitutes for the other. So it is a personal choice. Do the students prefer a print book to an ebook? As we've seen today, the ebooks have their advantages. They certainly have their advantages. And one of them is that they can be carried around on a device. You can access them anywhere, wherever you are. You can't forget your book. It's there. But you definitely don't need both. I'm sorry that I can't answer that question in more detail, and I believe that it's early yet for there have been any research that would have given any statistics on the impact of an ebook.
Yeah,
but there may well be.
I'm happy. Sorry, this is Ian. I'm happy to take, as you say, the last part there of the impact.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think you're. Sorry, I was going to say you're right. I think it's too early to know that. What I can do is answer the first question. As publishers, we've had a huge increase in demand and requests for ebooks in the last few months, perhaps unsurprisingly. I can say that the demand for them does seem to have gone up, and above all else, what's being asked for is flexibility. I think both students and the teachers are wanting that choice of either having a print book or an ebook, and expecting to have that sense of flexibility and being able to use a mix of both. So students who would prefer to have an ebook or perhaps can't get hold of the physical book want to be able to use the ebook, whereas other students would have the choice of having the print book. So above all else, there's an expectation, I think, of flexibility in the way in which they access the course materials.
Yes, I really like that point about being able to have both in the same classroom as well. It doesn't matter. You can have some students with print books and others with ebooks, and that won't make any difference to your classroom management. Shall I move on to the next question then? Let's see, we have Susanna. Are there advantages to students having the answers, perhaps for self-study? I think you have answered your own question in the question. Definitely, if your hoping to foster autonomy in the students, or you're asking them to work in a flipped approach, you will want them to be able to access the answers. I think the thing is not if the answer is correct or not, but whether if the answer is not correct, do you understand why not? Is there something you need to go back over? This flags the need for you maybe to go to the teacher and ask for more explanation. So really, yes, there are a lot of advantages in training students to find the answers for themselves, but obviously we need to be able to trust them to have done the activity first. But it's more about what can we learn from the mistakes rather than ticking the boxes of the correct answers. And there are not all activities have an answer. And a lot of the time when we're assessing our students through open answers where each student will have a different answer, and it's their ability to give us those answers that shows us that they really are using the language meaningfully to communicate something that they want to communicate. So you may want to withhold the answers for some students, or you may want to delay the release of the answers, but I think that with older students, adults, we should be able to trust them with the answer key. Okay. Jessica, this is an interesting question. Considering our teaching nowadays is often online, how can we foster group work in an online classroom? Okay, and I mentioned breakout rooms. So there are two ways I think that we can work with groups, and it depends very much on what platform we're using for our virtual classrooms. So some platforms have inbuilt breakout rooms. Basically, these are smaller virtual classrooms within the main classroom. The teacher manages them. We can break our group up into smaller groups of 3 or 4 students, and they are then in virtual classrooms of their own. The teacher isn't there, they're working independently on a task. The teacher can visit all of the different breakout rooms and monitor and help and prompt the students who are working within those groups. So basically, some platforms have this function which allows us to manage group work in a virtual classroom. Other platforms don't. So we would either need to go outside our virtual classroom and use, for example, Google Hangouts for group work, but that would mean that the students would leave your classroom and we'd need to trust them to come back to the main classroom. So there are technical issues about that, in which case you might want to use your virtual classroom for whole classwork and set up group work away from the virtual classroom so that the students choose a time when they can meet as a group to complete a task. Now, that obviously requires a lot more autonomy from the students and the ability for them to find a time when they can meet together. This works usually more efficiently with students who are in high school or secondary school who are following the same timetable. They know that they have the same free time. They're probably used to already forming work groups outside of their school timetable anyway. So we could set up asynchronous tasks which groups have to complete and then report back on when they come into the main classroom. So there are 2 ways. I don't know if that's enough detail. Russa is asking, how would I use an ebook in a classic classroom setting? Well, Russa, the uses I was talking about at the beginning of the webinar, for the first half or more of the webinar, were in a classic classroom setting. Basically, the students are accessing the ebook on tablets, on their laptop, on their phone, and they are sitting in a classic classroom together. Also, the teacher has the possibility to project from their own laptop or their own tablet or even their phone, depending on the projector that they have in their classroom. They would be able to project the ebook onto the board and share it with the whole class. It's not that different from everybody having the print book in the class. Basically, you have the ebook, and you can also be working in small groups. You need maybe one ebook for every 3 students. That would work as well. Okay, so Flor, this is an interesting follow-on question about the flipped classroom approach. So can you suggest any motivation tips to encourage students to do the required studying? So as I said before, my main strategy is to very gently make the students who haven't studied feel like they're missing out in some way. I'd like to give you an example of a lesson that I did recently with some adult beginners. We were coming up to telling the time, and I didn't want to use, we only met once a week, so I didn't want to use precious classroom time to look at telling the time and presenting and teaching the telling of the time. So I found a tutorial on YouTube and I shared the link with them, and I asked them to study it on their own before the class and to come to class prepared to explain it back to me. Then what I did at the beginning of the class was I played the same video tutorial to them, but with no volume. So basically they could see the visuals from the presentation, but they couldn't hear the explanation. And they had to explain the video back to me. The students who had watched it over and over were able to repeat it back to me almost verbatim and were very proud of themselves. The student who had hurriedly looked at it 5 minutes before the class started didn't get the same satisfaction from the initial activity, although they did get to catch up. So they actually learnt the presentation through their peers having presented it. But that student then the next time did do the work that was required. I think also another key to motivation is that it shouldn't be too much work. So watching a 3-minute tutorial is definitely not too much work. It should be something which is manageable, something that they can, that each student can do at their own pace, but that we're not asking them to invest a huge amount of time, but it's something that will save us time when it comes to the classroom.
Thank you. We've had a question coming about Presentation Plus as well, which I'll read out. What is the difference between eBooks and Presentation Plus, and should you as a teacher use both if you can? For those of you who are not familiar with Presentation Plus, this is the classroom presentation software that's provided by many of our courses, with many of our courses. And to summarize, Presentation Plus is the student's book, which you can present front of class, but also has other aspects to it, such as teaching notes, the full answer key, audio, video, and so on. So the main difference between Presentation Plus and eBooks is that the eBook is simply the student's book content, whereas Presentation Plus has a lot more content for the teacher, including the answer key. Now, I would say that obviously, Presentation Plus is best used in the hands of a teacher, and if you're a teacher in whatever setting, Presentation Plus is likely to be of use for you, whether you're teaching online, in which case you could use it on a screen sharing platform, or you can use it, of course, more traditionally at the front of the classroom. The ebook, though, is the student content, and that's what the student should have access to. I think most teachers wouldn't want the students having access to all of the teaching notes, all of the answer keys and so on. You want to choose when you give that to the student, basically. I think picking up on that comment earlier about answer keys, yes, of course, you can usually trust adults to have the answer keys, but as a teacher, you probably want to choose when they have access to those answers. And I think that seems to be the last question that's come in. We're nearly at the full hour. So I think finally thing to say is, firstly, thanks very much to Ceri. Great session. And thanks to all of you for attending and for all of your questions. That's pretty much all we've got time for today. But the recording of this webinar will be sent to you in an email along with your certificate of attendance. Again, please allow up to 2 weeks to receive this. We'll try and get it to you as soon as you can, but it may take up to 2 weeks. Hopefully you are able to download the free resources given to you as part of this webinar, which you should see on your screen on the right-hand side near your chat box. If you'd like further information on the Evolve ebooks, you can find this online at cambridge.org/evolve. That's EVOLVE. Or you can visit Cambridge Bookshelf to access a sample unit. Links have been provided in the chat box, so you should be able to access those. You can also download the Cambridge Bookshelf app from your app store of choice, from Google Play or the Apple App Store. If you download the Cambridge Bookshelf app, you'll then be able to see a free sample of the Evolve ebook. Ceri has also written a blog post for us on the world of better learning, which further explains the use of ebooks in today's physical and virtual classrooms. And the recording of this webinar will feature in a future blog post on the world of better learning later this month. Links to the latest post have been put in your chat box by Hannah. And the final thing to say is, if you enjoyed today's webinar, we have an online event taking place from the 8th to the 10th of September. This is Cambridge Live. So the Cambridge Live experience is 3 full days of exciting brand new sessions from our ELT and exam experts. Each session will be live from our teams around the world and will give you the inspiration and tools that you need to make your return to class that little bit easier. You can register now and be the first to find out when booking is open for these sessions by going to cambridgetogether.org/live. And again, I think Hannah will be and already has provided you with a link in your chat box. So thank you again to Ceri, to Hannah for helping manage all the questions there and for all the extra information. And thanks to you all for giving up your time to attend. Thanks very much.